sounds of New York. Work with us, YouTube. Okay, so welcome to week 10, guys. We finally, Philippe, thanks for holding it down with me. We've made it to week 10 of United We Taste, and we're doing Australia. And of course, we just had a little conversation before we started. The topic is Australia is burning, because the first thought I had when I thought about Australia was actually the same way the Bronx was listed on every newspaper in the 80s when it said the Bronx is burning, which clearly sounds like crazy when you think of an entire country / continent about the whole thing like lighting up on fire. So every report that we read, everything that you see in the news is always about the fires, but what else is going on? What other areas are not affected versus which ones are? And so I'm really excited to dive deep into that topic. So I'm your host, Cha McCoy, certified sommelier and wine experience producer from New York City, being quarantined in New York City, but currently living in Lisbon, Portugal. And I'm going to flip it over to Philippe to introduce himself.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon. I'm reaching you from Portugal in a small town called Agde in the wine region of Bairrada. So I'm very excited today to be here on this tasting because I was born in Australia. So I'm very excited and looking forward for this tasting. Just to mention that I work as a business consultant and I also run a blog called Vinho e Shima in Portugal.
Go ahead and show your little pride. I know you was excited to show us earlier. He represented for Australia today, so. Chastity.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chastity Cooper. I'm a communication strategist and wine journalist in Chicago. It is currently pretty early here, but I'm so excited to be on to learn more about Australian wines. And I've written for different publications like Wine Enthusiast, Vine Pair, Thrillist, and Essence. And I'm super excited to join you all today.
Yes, thanks for toughing it out. I was like, Chastity gonna kill me. You know, it's from the heart. And then we have Christie.
I'm Christie Frank, and I'm joining you from the small town of Copake, which is about 2 hours north of New York City. It's 9 a.m. here, so I thought it was early until I realized that Chastity was going to be here from Chicago, and she wins that. So thank you for waking up so early. I work part-time for Wine Australia based in the New York market. And then I'm also with my husband, a partner in a wine shop up here in the town of Copake, which is what I'm doing here right now. Wine stores in New York are essential businesses. So we are up here happy to be essential.
I've never heard of someone happy to be essential, but wine in this case, we can get away with that because we're making people happy during the quarantine. And I'm using that as my reason to Governor Cuomo to let me into my workspace too. I'm like, I'm essential, okay? I'm in the wine industry. Like, I feel like the FBI. It's funny. And then last but not least, we have two people dialing in a whole nother part of the day. We have Emily in China, and then we have Leanne in Australia. So for the two of you, I'm taking this pause because I want you to introduce yourselves, but also just tell us a little bit about the state of quarantine in your area of the world right now. And sorry, go ahead. You can start, Emily, with China.
All right, so I'm just out here in Shanghai, China, and state of the quarantine is everything's actually back to normal. So all the bars are filled up and restaurants have lines out of them. So we're right back to being in the office, but let's say areas are going to be different. So Beijing is not 100% back to normal yet. So it really depends on where you are, but it's really, there's a light at the end of the tunnel for everybody who's stuck at home. And yeah, so my name is Emily. I'm with Treasury. I head education for Asia. I also have my own podcast, which focuses on F&B. It started off for China, but now it's quite global. And I'm doing my MW right now, Certified Som, and I create programs for large hotel groups around Asia and do a lot of development for basic wine education to get the market up and to get our brands recognized, as well as just wine appreciation around the world.
So in case you want to know who I want to be when I grow up, Emily just like wrote out what my next 5-year plans are. Okay. Thanks, Emily, for joining. And I know hearing from you and being based in China will mean a lot to many people. So thank you for really sticking it out this evening. It's 9 p.m. where you at. So I think you probably have the sweetest deal on the tasting. 9 p.m. versus 11 p.m., 9 a.m. versus 8 a.m. So I think you're the one with the right time. But it's good to hear that you are well and people are back to some level of calm, where you at. So, Leanne?
Sure. So my name's Leanne Altmann. I'm joining you from Melbourne in Australia. I think 11 o'clock's okay. It's an okay time to have a glass of wine. Maybe a bit easier than 8 a.m.
That may be like glass 3.
Yeah. It's the third bottle. No.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm a sommelier, and I'm the beverage director of a series of restaurants in Melbourne. I also run WACT for our staff. Run WACT 2 and 3 for our staff. And I do a little bit of writing and a little bit of judging on the side when I'm procrastinating from my study.
Yes, totally.
Melbourne is in the state of Victoria, and we have a slightly more conservative approach to a gradual reopening that the Australian government is doing. So we're the only state at the moment, I think, where restaurants are still shut. Although we're going to start opening from the 1st of June, when we can have 20 people in the restaurant, as long as everyone's 4 meters apart from each other.
There's a lot more in New York. I think we're going to open up with 10. So trust me.
New South Wales opened with 10 last week. And I'm, it's tough to do anything with 10 people, but 20 is a little more manageable. And then hopefully we'll be able to have 50 people in the restaurant towards the end of the month. And they're aiming for 100 a month after that. So we'll see. We've certainly been much less impacted in Australia than I see in the US and in the UK and in Europe, and certainly in Asia and whatever's happening in Brazil. So I do think we're very lucky, but the tyranny of distance is maybe not such a tyranny at the moment. So
got it. Well, it's funny because I think Philippe being in Portugal, I think it's the 8th safest country, but I don't know if that's in Europe or that's the world, but I thought it was in the world. I think Japan was like number 2, which drives me crazy because it's so close to China. That how are they the second most safest country during this pandemic? I'm like, would they put up a wall around the country? They was like, no, we're just not gonna get it. Like, it's gonna fly right over us to Italy and Iran. And so I think that's just insane to think about. But glad to hear you guys are about to be opening again. Sound like there is a recovery plan, which I think that's more important than anything. That's every time I get on a call these days is what people, I'm glad we're talking about recovery now versus what's happening, how we're going to make our business run like in this moment, because now it's about how do we plan for when people are, as we say, let out, to the public again. And I don't know if that's going to be because everyone's more scared of a second wave than anything. And I don't know, just with Emily sharing, how is that affecting China? Whether Shanghai or other provinces, is there more of a second wave coming now that you guys are fully open. I do have a friend, I might as well say this too, who is teaching English in China, and she literally went on Instagram showing the check-in points for all the students to go through. So about how they check the temperatures, etc. Like she like basically explained the whole process of the 20 minutes it takes just to get to her classroom that wasn't there before. So is that the same thing in like restaurants and in bars and things that are fully open in China? How is that?
Yeah, well, I think especially, let's say a month ago, it was very, very strict. But now they're obviously loosening up a little bit. But if there's ever 1 or 2 cases, they crack down immediately and close it back down. So it's only open temporary unless there's something else that might come up. But, we're just dealing this with, for the first time as well. So it's very hard to say what's going to be the future. But yeah, there's lots of checks when you enter, temperature control everywhere. To see if you have a headache or a fever, etc. So they take your temperature, and then we all have a QR code, which is linked, and it shows us if you're green, then you can go in, and if you're not, then you're out. So
a lot of people who don't know that, and so that was interesting for you to share.
Yeah.
So we'll see if the U.S. is savvy enough to pick up on this QR code, but.
We'll see.
We'll see. I know Philippe, him and his cousins is swimming every day, and there's no one scanning them at all. So in Portugal, they just happen to be free, and it's 90-degree weather. They get it every day. So, but let's go to something I'm doing for the first time, guys. So stay with me. Bear with me. I'm going to share my screen. It's going to happen smoothly, because we're going to get right into tasting. So this is our virtual blind tasting. So this should be interesting. And because most people usually have no clue about the entire country / continent of Australia, how big it is, we thought it'd be cool to have this map part of this session. So everyone who's part of this tasting today, their region has been highlighted thanks to Christie, our in-resident Wine Australia educator. And so I think it was crazy because I think that Christie, you were the one who pointed out on Philippe's page that, wow, everyone's drinking white wine. So we do have, as we can see, Emily swirling her red. So we will have red towards the end. But let's go with, actually, since you're already swirling and you're the only one with the red, let's go ahead and start with you. I'm sure yours may be a little, let's see how obvious it is or not. So you're just going to go straight through your tasting, obviously without revealing what producer you can tell.
Wow. Okay. Well, the wine that I chose, I think, is very typical of Australia, especially when we talk about grape varietals and style. It's using, and I won't say, well, I hope I'm not going to say too much, but very famous grapes and a famous blend from Australia. So for this one, for me, there's a lot of oak on it. It definitely has a beautiful nuance, especially when it comes to, again, that oak integration. So the first thing you get is both that kind of ripe, richer fruit, and then a lot more of that oak. Then on the palate, what we have is something that's, I think, quite dense and rich. And so that type of wine for me really represents the warmer regions of Australia. I'm trying not to say the regions, but
yeah,
the warmer regions.
We've highlighted exactly the sub-region yours is from. So that's why I have the map up.
Right. So most of it comes from Barossa, but then actually comes from different regions as well, because it is a blend of Southeastern Australia. So it's not necessarily a single location, which is quite unique to this producer. So it is a higher end wine, but it definitely does not mean that it has to come from a small vineyard. In fact, this, I think, is what's great about Australia. It's very open-minded, and they're really putting the grape quality before necessarily the vineyard itself. So they're just looking at the grape here instead. So nice richness, very firm. The tannins are actually very firm, but they're very well integrated. So this is a very classic example of the style of wine. And the producer is quite famous as well, with lots of heritage. So we'll see if anybody can guess Southeastern Australia and what they feel.
Let us know what, I feel like I missed which fruit or floral, or can you go more in depth on that, on the nose or on the palate?
Yeah, for sure. So on the nose, if we are looking at the fruit though, this one's very fruit driven to start off with. So it's not necessarily hitting at all any tertiary at this point. So you're getting, for me, a lot of blackberry, a lot of and mostly not just unripe, but very ripe. Some more blackberry fruit, of course, some pepper. We also get a little bit more of that just richness. So again, very firm, some plum, but a lot more of that blackberry note and just a touch underlining of pepper. And of course, a little bit of that dried peppermint I always get on the palate of this one, just at the finish, like to uplift the wine.
All right. She gave us everything we needed. Maybe you want to tell us the vintage?
Right. So this one is A15.
Okay.
I don't know how much I'm supposed to share though, because
no, that's why I'm here. I'm here with you because I know which wine you have, so I can
Okay.
ask you the right questions without going too far. So
can I ask questions to delve with?
Of course.
Yes?
As long as you don't ask what wine is it.
What's the well, I can. She can choose not to answer. Emily, what's the acidity like?
So the acids, I would say more on the medium side. It's not necessarily super high.
How about the body and the texture?
So this is a lot, for me, it's definitely on a fuller body. Textures are some fun tenants, but actually I find them always very dense, especially because it's a 15 and this one can age a lot longer for myself, for what I feel. And so for me, it definitely has that persistence in the wine. And there's also just that type of savoriness. It's not at all tertiary, but it's just from that exact producer has that kind of tertiary character to it, but it's not at all leather or game. It's kind of more of a savory kind of trying to like more of a woodsy savory than it would be of a mushroom style. I don't know if that's helping. Yeah. I even this one, I never really do it blind as much because I feel it's very iconic blend though. So if you can get the blend, then it kind of sets you all in motion.
So does it have any pyrazine-like character? You mentioned
not
peppermint.
so much. No. Just a touch, I believe, on the finish, which just uplifts it, but it's not driven by the peppermint at all.
And you mentioned pepper as well, I think, like sort of is it like a black pepper spice or a savory spice?
More of a black pepper.
Okay.
Yeah.
I could take a punt, but that's not fair.
And Emily, you mentioned that it's a blend, huh?
It
is the usual blend. It's the style of that winemaker.
It's the usual blend also for the country of origin. So talking about Australia, it's I would say an iconic blend for Australia. And of course, for the producer as well, famous for doing those grapes. I guess I just kind of slipped it out there, but it is a blend of 2 grapes. I don't know if that helped.
That basically got it for me.
Anybody ready to take a guess?
For me, if it's an iconic producer, an iconic benchmark blend, then there would really only have to be 3 blends that you could put into that ring.
Okay, now that's cheating now. Let's go back to tasting notes. Is there anything that, everyone in this room is highly educated in wine. She gave us a lot of information. And I know, Leanne, what you're doing is like, if this is how I know you teach WSET. You're like, okay, first of all, figure out which one is not, it's impossible. And then this one, I was like, no, Leanne, we're going to do this the right way. Does any of the
I think
grapes?
I think we can start with the grapes, because that I think is like a huge clue. And I think, as I mentioned, and I let it slip, but that's fine. 2 grapes, extremely iconic, some pepper, some freshness with the mint on the finish. Needless to say more.
No.
Well, we can talk a little bit about why you would blend in the first place. And it's usually to balance out 2 grapes, or the parts of 2 grapes. I think I can guess what it is as well too. So
okay.
Trying to dance around.
Who's ready to take a leap? Come on, Christie, go ahead.
Well, I think I know, just kind of deducing into it, we're getting that black pepper spice. Black pepper spice, high percentage of the grapes coming from the Barossa, but not all of them. And knowing that it's from Australia, and Shiraz is the grape that's grown in every single region everywhere in Australia, I'm going to start with Shiraz. And then thinking, what might that other grape be? Just hearing about sort of the structure that's there. It sounds like it's a lush wine, it's a plush wine, but it's also got some structure and some background. I'm going to maybe think that Cabernet is the other grape, especially knowing that Shiraz Cabernet within Australia is indeed one of the most iconic blends that you can get from Australia, which you don't see in other countries quite as often.
Is she right, Emily?
She's very right. So that is the blend that of course that they're making. And you said something that's quite important, like the historical reasons behind it, which I think are also, I don't know if you're going to talk about that in a bit, but you are correct. This one's 53% Cabernet Sauvignon and 47% Shiraz. So it's almost like a 50-50 blend of Cab Shiraz. Yeah.
And is there a Coonawarra fruit component?
So there is a little bit of Coonawarra in this one, and this is a blend of different regions. So there is just a touch of Barossa, but the main region is a southeastern Australia, which don't think that that's only going to be low-end wine, which is a little bit confusing, because another clue, this producer, although you think it should be a blend from all southeastern Australia, should be actually low-end, is not the case with this specific producer.
Okay.
Yeah, when you talk about peppermint, the first region that comes to mind is always Coonawarra. It's that distinctive peppermint character that's definitive of the region. So that was the first thing that said to me, maybe this is that classic blackberry, rich plum, sort of meaty Barossa, and then that little peppermint fragrance of the Coonawarra.
And now I got a second question for you, Leanne, and you can show us the bottle, Emily. But for Leanne, is that peppermint that you're looking for in Coonawarra, is it on either one of the grapes, or are you just saying Coonawarra just kind of puts that on no matter what the grape is?
Coonawarra puts it on red grapes, yeah, absolutely. I most commonly, there were some wines from the 60s, a really famous wine from the 60s called Peppermint Patty, which was like the definitive, I think it's a nickname, but the definitive kind of wine that put Coonawarra on the map. But you do see this classic dried peppermint character. It's slightly related to eucalypt and that ripe pyrazine character in both Shiraz and Cabernet and Merlot from that region, and from some of the regions around it as well.
Okay. Thank you. I'm always looking down, taking notes. I'm here to learn from you guys as well. So I'm like, this is why you need a plug in every country to tell you what it's really like. So
well, the other thing from Coonawarra, if you're trying to break it down, is that because it's such a small region and such a small, like a tightly defined region, there's not many regions that we have which are defined on soil type, and that is the one that is. Because it's so small, there's a lot of larger producers there. There's not a lot of small, innovative producers. They're classic benchmark producers. So you do get a little bit more consistency of style and a little bit more predictability, I suppose, in what because they have a defined house style or regional style. So yeah, a certain amount of oak usage and particularly that peppermint note are two hallmarks of Coonawarra for me.
All right. And I brought up, since you were speaking about particular sub-region, I wanted to make sure I kind of showed people in the video where we're talking about for Coonawarra. So here we are. And it's right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Right there. And since you have the map up, the Barossa is highlighted because when I initially put the map together, I didn't realize we were going to have a red. And the Barossa is actually a larger region that encompasses the Barossa Valley and Eden Valley, which are the two two subregions that we'll see in the US quite a lot. But the wine that we just tasted will come from, if you see South Australia and you see Coonawarra, Adelaide Hills, Mulcairn Vale, Barossa. So Barossa encompasses Barossa Valley, Eden Valley, Clare Valley. Those are some of the most iconic regions in Australia. And the wine that we just tasted comes from, when we say it comes from South Australia, it's not coming from fruit that's like way up there in the north. It's coming from these really historic plots of land and vineyards and regions and valleys. It's kind of cool to taste all of the region in one bottle.
Let's see. So Emily, I don't know if you shared your bottle yet, but I'm gonna go ahead and let you bring your bottle to the camera.
Well, my first question is, does anybody know who this might be?
Oh,
do I have to
surely.
We have two Aussie experts, and I kind of feel like this one, if you give a little bit more hints, you should almost, I think I showed the bottle at the beginning, so that's my fear, but but just in case.
It's got to be a Penfolds wine, surely.
Yeah, Penfolds.
Yeah.
And so it is a Penfolds wine. And I used Corbin on that, so don't think I'm cheating, you guys. But this is the 389. Have you guys heard of Bin 389 before?
Yeah, Baby
From
Grange.
Australia, for sure.
Grange. Let's see.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So this is what we call baby Grange for us. And what it means is that actually a portion of the oak was aged in previous Grange barrels. So there's definitely that oak influence, and roughly about 30% is new oak, and then about another section is used oak from Grange. So for me, this is very typical South Australia style. For me, it's a very typical Cab Shiraz blend, and I think it does an excellent job of aging as well. So there's great aging potential for this wine. But again, there's one thing I just want to bring up is the entire blending idea, and Penfolds doesn't always fit into that category of high-end means single vineyard, and that's a little bit weird for a lot of us that love France, because that's completely the opposite of a lot of great Burgundy, right? For example, or what they teach you in WSET even, or anything. And here we're just basically looking at the quality. So it's a blend, and I'm just going to read them out because of course it changes every year. But for this exact one, it's Rattenbury is our key sourcing, McLaren Vale, Barossa, Coonawarra, and Pathway. So you have different regions, and what we're looking for is fruit quality and harmoniously blending the wine. So it's, it really, for me, is a very rich character, but I still think it has that purity and elegance that you get from Penfolds. So yeah, it's a really historic wine. It was started to be made in 1960s and continues today.
And the fruit from that wine, are you sourcing it from like small family growers that have the old vine stock?
So in this case, what we're going to do is that we source from either our own or also with other growers. Mm-hmm. And the way that we do it is we look at the vineyards and we go taste through the vineyards, and then we choose from the quality. So our top ones are going to go to Grange, and then it trickles down the ladder up into the bottom of Canunga Hill. And there's still, great fruit. So in terms of the vine age, we don't actually focus as much on the vine age as we do on the actual quality coming in to our winery facility. Even for, let's say, our Block 42, which is so far named the oldest Cabernet Sauvignon vines in the world, even then, it doesn't mean that we're going to create a single wine, even though there's one of the oldest vines in the world. We don't even do that because we look at the quality of that specific vintage. So the region might change. Sometimes the fruit that goes into this might go into 707 if the cab is fantastic. So it's not actually as bound to regionality as it would be for other producers, which is why I think this is very unique style, and to share with experts as you guys, because you would understand that. Oh. Did that answer did that answer the question? I'm not sure if it did.
Yeah.
Thanks, Emily. All right. So Christie, you're the one who picked up on that. So that means you're next.
Oh, okay.
You like, this is how we're going?
Well, since it's 9 o'clock in the morning here, I figured I would pick a white wine, Breakfast of Champions. I'll kind of go through the grid a little bit with this one. It's kind of a deep, I would say it's a deep straw. There's actually some slight sort of green flecks to it. Mm-hmm. It's clear. It's not doesn't have like a high level of viscosity. On the nose, it's very intense. There's some white flowers here. There's like lime flowers. There's a real sort of like lime character that's really kind of leaping out of the glass. Almost like a baked lime, or sort of like a lime, like a almost a candied lime, but not like sweet at all. A savory lime, I guess. There's a little bit of a nuttiness to it, kind of like a honey brioche kind of character. No, I'm not getting, even though there's that, like, there's a little bit of kind of a nutty character to it. It's not really a spice that I would get from oak. This wine feels like, at least on the nose, I'm gonna guess that it's in stainless, if I were guessing. On the palate, it is super refreshing. This is like absolutely breakfast wine, which is why I picked it, because I needed to wake up. The acid is super high, super racy. It is definitely led by that acid, but has a really long finish. It's a medium bodied wine. It's not a heavy wine, but it still has, there's a texture to it and a concentration to it. And that lime carries through. It's like really this electric lime, getting that buttered toast character, confirming no sort of oakiness to it. It's really, really fresh and bright and lively, but it's got this complexity that doesn't feel like age, but that nuttiness is something that would not be there if I was drinking it when it was super young.
Tell us the year.
And that's there. And there's a little bit of sort of a stony minerality to it, not necessarily like that real sensation of licking a rock that you might get from a German Riesling, but there's a steeliness to it. There's just like underneath all this beautiful sort of limey fruit and texture, there is this like kind of a steel rod. Yeah, that's it. It's definitely waking me up.
Well, sounds delicious. I would want that for breakfast. Go ahead and tell us what vintage it is.
It's 2008.
Ooh, oh, y'all showing out today. Okay.
Oh yeah, no, I went.
And let me go ahead and share the screen again so that you can talk about the region that the wine is from. You can just at least identify so people can see where we're talking about in that. So where's your white from?
This is from the Clare Valley, which is, we're still in South Australia, but we're starting to go, the city of Adelaide is the main city within South Australia. And Clare Valley is about an hour and a half to 2 hours north of Adelaide, depending on where you're going and how fast you're driving. And this map doesn't show mountains, but so we would call it the Rocky Mountains would not call it a mountain range, but it's a very hilly part of Australia. Okay. And it's the Mount Lofty ranges, and they basically, you get a little bit of altitude here. So Clare Valley is a warm climate, and you don't necessarily think warm climate Riesling. And there's a lot of Shiraz that's grown. I just gave things away, maybe. Not very good at this. Just guess. But there's a lot of grapes that are grown here. There's Riesling, there's Shiraz, there are Italian grape varieties, there's Cabernet, and it's a continental climate, so you get these big drops between daytime temperature and nighttime temperature. And I will stop talking and let people maybe guess.
Well, let's do this. Have you said the grape or have you not said the grape?
I said a lot of grapes, so yes.
Okay, that's
okay. Well, I said Italian grapes, so I need to include the Italian grapes. There's a little bit of Avocado.
No. I just want to make sure that the grape that we're guessing, the variety, has it been announced or has it not been announced?
It has been said.
So she's already given you a heads up where you need to go. So, any takers? This is an easy one. This is a freebie now.
But we can go a little bit deeper.
All right, we can. I'm open to that. So I'll let you lead the questions if you want to say that, because after we guess, someone want to say what grape it is now? Not all at once.
Riesling. Riesling.
I have a question. Who, knowing that I was having a white from Clare Valley, who would have guessed that it was Riesling kind of without even knowing it?
No,
No, that wasn't my guess.
not a guess. Never.
Am I crazy? Leanne, is not Clare and Eden Valley both known for Rieslings? I'm not.
Definitive Riesling, yeah.
That's like Riesling world. Clare,
yeah,
absolutely.
Even though there's some incredible Shiraz producers in both of those regions, I think Riesling is probably the first thing that you think of. So Clare Valley Riesling kind of is just one word.
It's like, and I think the same way about Eden.
The region, if you look for Riesling, it'll be the region most widely represented. Yeah, by far. And again, a really definitive style. There's a few producers playing around with some residual sugar, but for the most part, it's dry stainless steel, not a lot of lees influence, cold fermentations, often inoculated, often acidified. But then there's a lot of, and they all kind of taste the same. And then there's the producers who are all about the vineyard, the yield, the trying to build texture and natural acidity. So it's a very traditional region, but there's some really exciting producers there as well, really quality driven producers.
Yeah. And Eden Valley, I think because they both have Valley next to it, so maybe that's me using my cheat codes from WSET too. Eden, Clare Valley, Riesling. That's I just put them in the Riesling box and I kind of leave it there. Pewsey was how you pronounce that?
Oh, Pewsey.
Pewsey. That's like my go-to when someone said, "Oh, Riesling from Australia." I'm like, "You've never had Pewsey?" I always think I'm saying it wrong, so I'm glad I just spelled it and started to say it. But Pewsey, and then people are like, "Yeah, I've heard of it," or maybe I didn't pay no attention. But that's like my go-to when I'm telling a client about Rieslings from Australia. That's like my textbook version. So I'm glad you guys kind of brought that to light, because like most people would not have known about Rieslings from Australia or from this area. But Chassie, I'm gonna let you pick it up here because I want to make sure we get through the tasting and then we can like have our discussion about Australia at the end.
Sure. I'm not on mute. Okay, great. So I also picked a white wine. The wine that was just there, Christie, sounds like delicious. Now, as you were describing, I was like, that sounds, could it be? But it wasn't so great. But mine is a deep lemon color. On the nose, the intensity is medium. I get a lot of lime, like citrus fruit, a little bit of nuttiness, more kind of like a pastry bread, some straw notes, some grass, some really fresh notes from like straw, grass, a little bit of like saltiness. There is some subtle sweetness from honey that I get also, and a little very few floral notes. And then on the palate, it's has a little bit of body to it. There is some medium acidity. I would say it's low in alcohol for sure. This isn't a wine that is definitely one that I would probably refer to friends if they weren't, looking for anything to pair with a dinner that's like super savory. This is definitely something you can enjoy on a warm spring or summer day. And it's interesting because all of these flavors tend to work together. So the wine is actually quite complex. And I like how everything kind of like melts together and it gives this really just fresh, clean finish in the end. So it's, I think, quite affordable. I picked this up. It's not, completely over budget, but definitely one of those wines that is considered a shareable. To me, I think it's something that you could bring to a cookout, to a barbecue. But on the end, it's definitely kind of have this round mouth feel, if that makes sense.
Does it have any oak influence?
I'm sorry?
Does it have any oak influence?
No, not quite. I wouldn't even call it oak. It's definitely more of a nuttiness, more of kind of like pastry, like a kind of like a bready influence more than anything.
And you said I think you said there was some was there some grassiness or some herbs to it?
Yeah, just a little bit of herbaceousness with some grass, some straw, kind of just a really fresh flavor, like almost, I don't want to say fresh cut grass, but along those lines, just a little bit of freshness there.
Does it make your mouth water?
It does, yes.
Okay.
Acidity, yes. It's about, I'd say, medium acidity for sure.
Is it a blend or single varietal?
Single varietal.
And you're in the Hunter Valley, right?
I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen for those who are watching too. Show you guys where Hunter Valley is located. So we're over here now in New South Wales.
Just a little bit north of Sydney.
I know, I can't wait. I want to go to Australia. I hope they watch it.
Australia.
Girl, I need some, look, now that wine is my full gig, I need someone to fly me out. That's why I always call on them. I'm like, okay, Wines of Australia, by the way, your girl need help, okay? Bring me to Australia.
Man, once the trips start again, you know.
Yeah, well, I know the right people, so clearly, and I know y'all can call up, bring some folks. Like, let y'all come, let her show to everybody. This is what Australia feels like. For Hunter Valley, being so close to Sydney makes that even more. Well, I guess Leanne, you can tell me, how is it? Can you just go from Sydney and like you see the vineyards right outside the big city? I have never. No, it's not like that.
Okay. For a bit. I've never driven it. It's a couple of hours, I think, hour and a half, 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Hunter Valley is really unique, and it's the style, the traditional styles of the region, and let's say there's two traditional styles of the region, a white one and a red one, really dictated by the weather. And Chastity mentioned that it's quite light in body and quite high in acidity. And that's because in this region, the rains come quite close to the harvest time. And so they often have to pick really early. Mm-hmm. And you get these low alcohol wines because they're trying to prevent rot. And because it can be quite humid, lots of cloud cover. So it's a region that has some climatic difficulties or climatic differences from every other region in Australia.
Well, a little extra tidbit. Leanne, what grape could it possibly be then? Is there anything that...
Semillon. If it's a white grape from the Hunter, it's only going to be Semillon. Obviously,
right?
I would guess that too.
Are correct.
Yeah.
It's
perfect.
It's a classic.
Can we see the...
Can you bring it back again? Oh, terroir.
Here, and I need to show mine.
Oh, there you go.
Yum.
What's that?
And the fact that
Cross Riesling anywhere, come on.
That's the other big producer, but we'll talk about that, the other name to know in Australian Riesling. But the fact that, Chastity, you were thinking that mine might be the same as yours makes perfect sense, because the acid, the mouth-watering thing, it's being refreshing but still having this texture.
Yeah.
I have limes, you have herbs. Especially when they start to age, you get this like lime on marmalade toast character out of almost both of them. So they can be really hard to be able to tell apart.
Yeah, and I was describing it. I was like, whoa, that sounds a lot. I was like, I hope she doesn't have my wine, but I know we would have all, that would have probably, had changed early on. But I like you, child. I really want to go to Australia. There's just so much to discover there. Like,
Chastity wants to come. Anybody who want to know who I'm coming with, I'm bringing Chastity.
I'll be there.
We'll go too.
Oh, look, Philippe want to go wherever I'm at. Philippe, stay in Portugal, okay?
I'm there. I'm missing Australia. I left Australia in 81, so I need to go back.
Where were you born?
In Sydney.
Okay.
I still can remember going with my parents to Hunter's Valley It was 2.5 hours drive. So I still have some memories from my childhood in Hunters Valley. Beautiful, beautiful region.
Wow. All right, Leanne. Well, you got that one. So it's your turn.
All right. Okay. So mine is a white wine as well.
Yes. We all have white wines. We got the one red. It's kind of crazy because I think
trying
that's
to dispel the myth that all we make is red wine.
I know.
Right.
And it's only Shiraz.
Only Shiraz, that's it.
And it's funny because even in when I did Germany, everyone thought we was gonna have all whites, and everybody ended up having Pinot Noir. It was like the craziest.
Oh wow!
Like, what? Like it was one guy with white, and it was with a white wine that no one probably would even know to guess, and then everybody else had red. So this is how you know we're really in the industry. They're like, I'm gonna bring something special, and then everyone brings something special. Okay.
Yeah. always. Okay, so it's a clear white wine. It's quite star bright, really youthful in appearance, kind of medium lemon color, moderate viscosity, and it's quite youthful. Well, it's very youthful, but it's quite lifted and aromatic. It's like medium plus aromatic character. There's lots of ripe lemon, like Meyer lemon character, lots of white peach, white nectarine, a little bit of white flower, and there's a flinty struck match note as well. A little bit of spice, like a little bit of nutmeg, but it's not overwhelming. It's just a gentle hint behind the fruit. A little stony character as well. I haven't actually tasted this yet, so you're just getting this.
Fresh off the press.
Yeah. So it's dry, quite high acidity, but medium plus, really just pushing on high, so quite elevated acidity, and medium plus body. Again, the fruit's ripe. It's quite fleshy. Sort of ripe peach, ripe nectarine, maybe a little bit of red apple skin. There is oak influence, but again, it's really savory. It's like a seasoning of oak. It's certainly not oaky at all. Just a little sort of warming spice, baking spice. The acidity drives the palate definitely through the back. It's kind of really pulls in tight like a tadpole. So lots of fleshy fruit up front and then pulls in. What else? There's a gently creamy texture, maybe a little bit like yogurt or creme fraiche. And yeah, lovely concentration. Pretty long. That's it. Any questions?
Can you share
maybe a little flinty thing too.
Can you share the vintage?
It's 2018.
And I'm going to share my screen again and bring us back to the map. And let's just, without saying the grapes, let me know where your wine is coming from.
Absolutely. My wine is from the Adelaide Hills.
Adelaide Hills. Here we are, everyone. So we're back in South Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Leanne, is that a blend or single?
It's a single variety.
Okay.
I mean, everything you said is so much character with oak and some lees and some mallow, it sounds like. So there's almost just one grape, and Adelaide Hills is famous for it. So, yeah, I think
reduction.
I'll let everybody starts with the C.
Yeah, I didn't really pick a confusing one. Sorry.
No. That's good. Go ahead, Emily. Tell us what you think.
So it's a Chard from the tasting note.
Yeah.
And yeah, Adelaide Hills is delicious for that. So that's definitely Pinot and Chardonnay heaven.
Mm. Yeah, I actually, a lot of my families, well, all of my families from the Adelaide Hills. So I grew up halfway between the Adelaide Hills and McLaren Vale. And so I figured it was, heartland wine. but I also thought it was important to show Chardonnay because I think we're so known for Shiraz and maybe big buttery Chardonnay, and this is very much not that. But I do think Chardonnay is the grape variety that across a number of different regions is the variety that we compete on the world stage. And I hope this makes this to the US, but if it does, you should seek it out because it's delicious. So this is from Sharon Smith. Which is a really high quality producer from the Adelaide Hills, one of my favorites. And they initially just focused on Chardonnay and made a little bit of Shiraz, well, Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, really, the two kind of key varieties of the Adelaide Hills. And now make Pinot, Shiraz, a Riesling that's pretty hard to get. And also have a venture in Tasmania called Toll Puddle, which is a real favorite. But this is different than their normal Chardonnay, which is called M3, and it has more of a red label. This is from the Lenswood Vineyard, which they bought maybe 6 years ago. Oh, sorry, first vintage was maybe 2014, I think. But Lenswood is a sub-region, or not, it's not an official sub-region. It's a sort of an area within the Adelaide Hills, which is more elevated. And the winemakers and owners here were really seeking cool climate character and looking to balance out any climate change. And the fact that even though we call the Adelaide Hills a cool climate, it's not. I mean, it's still warm in the summer, and they still experience a lot of heat. It's just not as warm as you might see in the Barossa. So they were looking, if you can't go south, which there's nothing south of the Adelaide Hills except an island and then Antarctica. So then you have to go up. And this is in the Mount Lofty Ranges. So it's about 500 meters of altitude. And yeah, so it's one of my favorite wines that they produce. I don't think this is released yet. It's new.
I don't know if we definitely have Sharon Smith in the US. I don't know if we have that specific vineyard.
Yeah, they don't make much of it.
Yeah, and they're so fun to put in blind tastings. If we were doing this as just a Chardonnay blind tasting, any number of people would be stumped about that because they do have in their head that Australian Chardonnay is going to be this big, ripe, over the top sort of style. And that has flinty reduction. It's got subtle oak. It's got beautiful pure fruit. Like it really, in a blind tasting setting, it shows that you need to think differently about Australian Chardonnay.
Yeah, and
especially Adelaide Hills.
Even M3, the wine that's, it's still a very premium wine. Their normal Chardonnay, so to speak, is richer than this, but it's still not what overseas guests tell me that they expect of Adelaide Hills Chardonnay. So they expect even more richness and even more butteriness, which it's kind of hard to find now. It's definitely not the norm.
Okay. And my question was, really quickly, would you think that today Chardonnay is coming out of Australia, whether that's the entire country or just that one particular region in Adelaide Hills? Are they more on the old world style or closer to the new world style, or is it something in the middle like South African? Like which ones would you actually compare if someone loved wines from either three of those areas? Which one would you compare it closer to?
They're closer to the Côte de Beaune. Don't really have as much salty minerality, but in that purity of fruit, I think that they probably speak more to France than they do to, say, South Africa. But obviously our climate is very different. Our soils are very different. And I think it's exciting to see winemakers they're not saying this is a Chablis-esque Chardonnay like they were maybe 10 years ago. They're saying this is the best Australian Chardonnay we can make.
And
it's really important.
They'll say this is the best Adelaide Hills Chardonnay that we can make, or this is the best Margaret River Chardonnay that we can make. So Margaret River is on the complete other side of the country. So it's like the difference between New York and San Francisco, essentially. So we're starting to really see, what's exciting is seeing that there's not one style now. We're really getting a regional sense, as well as the winemakers are just being more confident about sort of making a style that they want, without trying to completely obscure what their specific region wants them to
I
do.
think that is both stylistic and also terroir based, so
yes.
or vineyard based. So if you look at Margaret River, for instance, the clone of Chardonnay that they have there, Western Australia has a really tight quarantine system, and so does South Australia. So you can't bring plants into Western Australia. So all of the vines that they have there are very distinctive, and they have the Mendoza clone, the hen and chicken clone, which they call Gin Gin, and it gets this kind of peach tinned pineapple character, which is really distinctive for Margaret River. And I actually would get Margaret River more confused with Marlborough Chardonnay or New Zealand Chardonnay than I would with South Australia or Victoria because of the clone. Victoria, for instance, for me, it's, you know, there's some incredible regions, Macedon Ranges, but it's probably the Yarra Valley, which is the, you know, this really outstanding Chardonnay region, particularly in the upper Yarra Valley. And there's been a real stylistic change over the last 15 years, where they really pushed these early picked, highly reductive, really quite skinny Chardonnay, and have now come out of that with an identity, I suppose, of what Yarra Valley Chardonnay looks like. That's quite consistent from producer to producer. So it's, I love Australian Chardonnay, and I think we can justifiably be very proud of it.
Awesome. I love that.
Leanne, I just have a quick question for you guys. I know that recently, in terms of the fires that took place in 2019, slightly in 2020, there was Adelaide Hills did get slightly affected. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that might affect, in your view, smoke chain or anything like that? Or a lot of people are saying it's not that bad, but what about Adelaide Hills in particular?
It's really bad.
Sorry, Emily.
Say it's not that bad because it's really bad.
Sorry, Leanne. Let me let Philippe and I do our tasting so that we can pick up with that, because then we'll never get to our wine. So Philippe, go ahead. I know, Emily, you didn't hear us. We're going to ask all the questions afterwards so that we can at least end in a decent time, because if we don't finish our wines, we'll never get to them. Go ahead, Philippe.
Right. So I bring also a white wine. You can notice beautiful straw with this slightly greenish color. On the nose, I can take ripe melon, also a few cashew in there. Beautiful, lush and fresh wine with a great balance between the fruit and the acidity. The finish is long. Also get some notes of white nectarine, some lemon, definitely, and slight toast notes. It's very elegant wine, as I mentioned. Pair very well with seafood or pasta. Just to mention, this is 2014 vintage.
And go ahead and tell us what region it's from, and I'm going to share the map again.
Right. So this wine, it comes from Eden Valley.
Eden. Okay.
Which is in the Barossa. The Barossa subregion, so they're looped in together. Eden's a little higher.
Yeah, it's usually on top.
Cool climate and rocky soils. So you can feel also a bit minerality in the wine. Very fresh.
Any more questions? Any takers?
What's the acidity like?
Acidity is medium.
Now, you didn't mention any oak, but did you get any oak notes on it? Yes, or
there's some toasted notes on there. Part of the fermentation was done in oak, 40%, and 60% was fermented in tanks.
Okay.
And is it a single variety or a blend?
Yes, it's a single.
Is it a variety that's well known from this region?
Yes, it's very well known.
Australia's most planted white grape variety?
I mean, I feel like going back to the shard idea, so much great experience being made with like piano and cool things as well, but your tasting note just kind of draws me back to shard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a shard.
Look at that.
Well done.
I so wanted to make it be a Riesling because Pusey Vale is from Eden Valley, and that's the other but I just couldn't. Your note was clearly Chardonnay. Awesome.
The green tint also kind of gave it away. I was like, that can't be a Riesling, but that's cool.
So this is a Peter Lemon, 2014 from Eden Valley.
Cool. So with a little bit of age on it. Nice.
So lots of the Barossa Valley producers will have their white wines coming from the Eden Valley side of the range, so that because it's a bit cooler and a bit fresher.
Yes, that's the sort of the irony of the Eden Valley is actually at higher altitude than the Barossa Valley. Like you think it's going to be lower because it's a valley, but you go up to get altitude, which is how you get the coolness.
All right. Last but not least.
All right.
I thought I was doing something. Let's see what you guys think. So the color on this, clear, got a green tinge to it too. And I can tell you right now that it's not that intense on the nose, but the first note you get is definitely ripe citrus. Yeah, we go ripe citrus, and then it becomes floral the more you get in there, but it's like a baby breath powder, very fresh aromas. On the attack, it actually is the acid that comes away, but it's still a medium plus. I wouldn't say that it's high, strikingly high, but then the flavors is more like a melon. You'll get a mixture of that citrus, but it's more rounder when you actually swish. It smells like it's probably going to go straight to something super citrusy, but the texture of it, the mouthfeel is actually more rounding. And I would say that melon flavor, like a honeydew green melon, is actually more pronounced than the citrus would be. Easy drinkable summer wine. Also one that I think it's the texture that makes you feel like it's actually going to be heavier as far as alcohol, but it actually is pretty moderately low. I believe it's 11% alcohol. I would probably just have it because it's 10 a.m. And so I feel like it's acceptable. Yeah, so it's acceptable. Yeah, but no, to be honest, I think that I guess I can give it like more relatable to myself. I really love this grape. It's traditionally usually blended in other places. In this case, it is 100% as a monovarietal wine. So I forget the rules. In Australia, is it like I think it's like America, right? 75%?
It's 85%.
85, okay.
85, so region, variety, and country.
Got it. So for those who are listening, what we're basically saying is that in the AVA in the US, 75%, in order to make it a single varietal for the say Chardonnay, like everyone said, it must be just 75%, and you can have other things. This case is 85. So I hope I answered everything people want. I mean, I really think it really good goes well with hollandaise sauce. So I would really truly see this as a brunch wine as well, because it's so light and easy to drink. And I think that roundness of the texture allows me to think about eggs Benedict, so that's why I'm thinking more of a cool breakfast wine as well. I think Australia, you probably love avocado toast like the rest of the world.
So much. So much avocado toast.
I think the whole world's on the avocado toast craze, and this would be the avocado toast wine. So, nice enough green notes, roundness to give you texture, but also it has this pungency on the flavor or the acid that balance well with it. So I don't want to call it spicy, but there is something that is maybe it's like a dill, but not in the oak way, but fresh dill that comes off as a herb that will be complementary to it. So any takers?
And you're in the Hunter, right?
I am in Hunter.
Do we have a repeat?
We do.
Okay, good. Because I was like, is it Semillon?
It is Semillon. And I thought it was interesting when when Chastity had it, because I already had purchased my wine before she sent me her wine. And so I didn't want to go send her back, but at the to the store. But let me clean my bottle.
Oh, cool. Okay.
First Creek, Semillon, 2017. And I guess for those of you listening, basically everyone's basically using like logic also, because when you talk about these regions, it's so helpful to kind of know what grows where to help you. There may be some stars or some underrated winemakers who are doing something different and unique in certain places, and this is everywhere, not just Australia, who are contributing to that. But I do feel like there's something to be said. And I thought this was going to happen when I did the French episode. I don't know if you've ever watched it or you want to go back and laugh at me and everyone else, because people were bringing out Blanc de Noirs. I was like, wait a minute. How are you telling us about a red wine that's white? No one's going to get this. But it was just funny because I felt like that. I thought that sharing the sub-region for France would be too much, because I said everyone's gonna get it so easy, like how you guys just gracefully did today with Australia. But people were really stumped because people had all these rogue winemakers, and so it was kind of interesting. I was like, no one got anything. Like it was so, I would say it was horrible, but I think it was funny if you wanted to compare this episode to that one. Because it shows you how much, or at least this episode will show you how much knowing the map is so important to actually identifying terroir, which relate to which grapes goes well, but also is the cheat code for people who don't know much about terroir, but really want to know, but like, I really love that grape. Where should I go? Okay, look for Hunter Valley. If you don't know right now, if you loved what Chastity described about her wine, if you love avocado toast and you want to have mine, just know that, we're both talking about Semillon, which is from this region. And so I think that, does that mean no one's making Semillon nowhere else? No, I'm sure you can find, especially if you're literally in Australia, you can probably find winemakers who are using the grape in other ways in other regions. But if you're all over here in the US, most likely you're going for where the textbook, version is going to be more easily accessible. Chastity's in Chicago, I'm in New York, and we both have Semillon from Hunter Valley. So I'm going to make sure we get to questions because we're just at the hour past mark, and I want to make sure some of those questions like I had in the beginning and what Emily brought up is at least voiced before we all jump off. But let's do a toast since we're finishing the wine part. Now we can just swirl and enjoy each other. Thank you guys. So Philippe, you got us under control. Emily, want to get your glass up so we can get you in a screenshot?
Here we go. Thank you.
And so I think it's interesting, back to the idea of the topic, right? So Australia is burning. Emily brought it up perfectly as well when we was tasting the Adelaide Hills wine, which was the wine that Leanne shared with us. Just understand that all of Australia is not burning, correct?
Right.
Exactly. Everyone learned that. And so, and particularly, I even listed some of the areas that a recent article had brought up. Queensland, let me do a little screen sharing since we're talking about locations. Give people some context. Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, Victoria, and specifically even Hunter Valley came up, and Adelaide Hills. So that is the areas that this article was referring to. And it was talking about how is Australian wine industry dealing with climate change. And that was just a personal note on me of what I came up with, but also Emily's point to specifically Adelaide Hills. If there's any context, whether it's Leanne or even Christie can give to what's so special about this area that will make that the focus of the fires. And by the way, let's also just take a moment to notice that these areas we have you see no wineries listed, but we'll get to that on why these areas are probably not good for wine as well. But just Queensland was also mentioned in there for that as well, where the fires are.
Yeah, do you want me to talk a bit about this summer? Summer just gone?
Well, I have friends, yeah. I mentioned it in my post too, like I have friends who literally were there on vacation and they just had all of this smoke in all their photos, and we were just happy they were alive from what it was like the end of the world from her pictures. But yeah, but just share with us from a first-hand perspective.
Like we so my family's from my family live a little bit south of McLaren Vale, and there were fires that started just before Christmas, and they basically burned through the Adelaide Hills. And then there was also an enormous fire on Kangaroo Island, which is the large island south of Adelaide, which was really detrimental to a lot of flora and fauna and a lot of things that are unique to that island. So that's going to take a lot of work to reinvigorate that area because it's quite isolated. But the Adelaide Hills lost about a third of its vineyard growing area. Some people died. And the wine that I'm drinking, actually, I texted the winemaker when the fires were on, and how are you and everything, and he said the fire got right up to the boundary of the vineyard, the CFS, the firefighters, stopped the fire there at the boundary of that vineyard. The thing that's very challenging about the Adelaide Hills is that the vineyards that were burned, a lot of them belonged to growers. So although there were some producers who were highly affected, everything gone, their house, their winery, all their vineyards burned, there were a lot of kind of anonymous people who were affected. And so it's not just the individual wineries that are affected, but also the wineries who source their fruit from growers, which is a lot of people in the Adelaide Hills. I haven't heard too much about smoke taint, but everyone was just saying, well, it's basically a write-off. There'll be lots of quick pressed white wines. The University of Adelaide and the CSIRO do a lot of work with smoke taint in Australia because it's our major climatic influence and or threat, and so a lot of it is about discarding the skins, but so there won't be a lot of skin contact whites or red wines from 2020 across southeastern Australia. When I came home to Melbourne, it was also on fire. Not Melbourne itself, but in Gippsland, which is an enormous region to the very east, and up in the northeast of Victoria, which is possibly some of the most beautiful place in all of Victoria. So in the Alpine valleys, the King Valley around Beechworth, really, really scary fires that, eucalypt trees burn very easily. There's a lot of oil, and the fires were so big they were creating their own climate, their own weather systems. But it's weird how there's pockets of growers that I've spoken to, producers who were not affected. So the Yarra Valley, for instance, has had an incredible vintage in 2020. And the producers are saying that it's like, although the yields are really down, they had a magnificent vintage. There are areas of the King Valley where the day that one of the big fire events happened, the wind turned and the smoke was blown in the other direction, and they didn't get the massive cloud of smoke that sat over Beechworth. So there's parts of the King Valley and Whitlands that are almost unaffected because they were too high, they were above the smoke. But, you know, if you look at Beechworth, it's like Giaconda, all of those sorts of producers, it's the smoke taint levels were so high that you can't make wine from it. Tyrrell's, Chastity's wine, they're not making wine in 2020. They dropped all their fruit, and the Hunter Valley was highly affected. There's a lot of producers in the southern part of New South Wales that were highly affected too. So, and it's just smoke taint that makes the fruit unusable.
Yeah, I think looking at the numbers, lucky is not the right word, but it was only about 1% of total vineyards that were impacted. And a lot of that was in the Adelaide Hill. At one point it was 30%, it's somewhere between 15, 20, 30% of actual vines that were destroyed. Yeah. But the smoke taint that's the big issue, especially if you look up the Hunter, for example, some of those vines were under smoke for, I think, 80, 90 days. I mean, you stand in a campfire for like an hour and you smell like smoke. Now, there is a lot of research going on. There was already a lot of research, but what was the case is it was never at this point during the harvest. And smoke taint also has a way of showing up perhaps after the fact. So there's a lot, I think in the Hunter, the figure that I've heard is the crop levels or the production levels will be down, you know, maybe it'll be 20% of what it normally is. And bushfires happen in Australia, but not quite to this level.
Not like this. Yeah.
This was a special year. But then you look at the Margaret River, Western Australia, nothing.
It's funny, isn't it, Margaret River, like you think of, oh, it's still Australian. And I know you said before, it's like going from New York to San Francisco.
Yeah.
But I went to the Margaret River for the first time last year or the year before. And I got off the plane, and then you have this massive long drive to Margaret River from Perth. And I could have been in Japan, you know. And and I got out of the car and it smelt different. You know, the plants are so different. The climate is so different. And I didn't recognize any of the plants. And it was like being in another country.
Yeah.
It's so far away. So there's no, you know, it's unaffected. As far as I know.
Philippe, go ahead. Oh, we may have lost Philippe.
He's so still.
Now I realize he's so still. But it's funny, yes. Go ahead, Philippe. We see you now.
I'm still here.
Wow. Okay.
I have a question to Leanne and Christie. I'm a sparkling wine guy, and I noticed that there's some sparkling wine being made in Tasmania. Is there any other project in mainland besides Tasmania?
Oh, Adelaide Hills, Yarra Valley. There's sparkling lots of places, but the Adelaide Hills and the Yarra Valley, they're making some fantastic sparklings.
I think if you're comparing them with other countries, like there's a lot of producers who make method champenoise, traditional method wines. We struggle sometimes because the fruit is a bit riper, and our taxation system doesn't make it very easy to age the wines for a long time. So they tend to be a little bit more fruity. But there are some incredible producers in the Adelaide Hills, in Tasmania, in the Yarra Valley, and many others. I tasted a wine recently made by a Geelong winemaker with fruit from Henty in the west of Victoria, which is just, I think, one of the best Australian sparklings I've ever tried. But they tend to be, just a little bit more fruit forward than you'd find from France, for instance.
And not necessarily the same amount of reserve wine requirements, but you know, it's a big country, and once you start to play with altitude and the specific sites, that's where you can start to really find places that do lend themselves to sparkling wine. So it's not just Tasmania.
there's also a great love of domestic Prosecco, which we still label as Prosecco, not Glera. And it's a massive, massive demand. And pet nat as well, quite a lot of pet nat.
Oh yes, lots of pet nat from all over the place, and especially the Adelaide Hills.
Yarra Valley.
Yeah, the Adelaide Hills. There's a lot of experimentation in the Adelaide Hills. It's a big region. It's got a lot of diversity in terms of topography and in terms of grapes. So yeah, pretty much we could do a whole session on the Adelaide Hills, and that would be where some stumper wines could really, really come from. If
the varieties would be not what you expect.
Yeah.
And neither would the alcohol levels. Yeah, really diverse and experimental and exciting group of producers who work together, and who have had a lot of influence on other regions as well.
Yeah.
So I know we have the Australian wine experts here, but I think that it'd be great to get from everyone else who is not an expert in Australian wine, but also that Australian wine is sold and obviously enjoyed where we're located. So just give me, what is the perception of Australian wine where you are located? So in that case, Emily, let us know what's your idea. And that's, you and I, when we talked, I was like, oh, this would be awesome to have you on board for the Australian, because Australia and China is close enough that I'm sure Australia is basically like how everyone may drink something, Europe is to New York. Like we just like, oh, let's just, easy, just have it over. It sounds weird because people don't think that way, but Portugal is only a 6-hour flight from New York City. So in that case, we can get all the European wine we want right here in New York without issues, versus someone in California, they, that's a longer journey for them to get European wine. So in that case, I know China and Australia is way closer, so I'm interested to hear your perspective. Chastity, with you being in Chicago, what's the thoughts of being around in the wine shops, et cetera? Is it a big section in the wine stores, or not really? Or is it all just Shiraz? And the same thing for Philippe being in Portugal. I just want to hear, and then Christie has a wine shop, so, I'm biased. So she can obviously, it's a little bit different because she is a wine educator. So I'm sure she probably, if you're in New York area, it's like, okay, if you want a really good Australian wine list in a shop, I'm probably sure just go to Christie's shop. We can just all go there. But I'm interested in hearing everyone's perspective on the global perception of Australian wines where you're located. So Emily, just tell us go ahead and start with China.
Right. So I think Australia, actually, what a lot of people probably don't know, of course, if you're in Australia or working with Wine Australia, you probably do know this, but it is currently one of the largest categories in China. So it started off with Bordeaux, but just last year, actually Australia dominated in terms of value imported into China, even beyond France. So right now, Australia is the leading category. And that is really key also because there's been some less taxes and there's been a trade agreement, and that kicked off officially a while back, but now officially implemented in 2019 as well. But we're going to see where that goes because there's now other discussions being made. Overall, Australia is a very positively looked at for country. First of all, for great value wines, because just it's much more bold taste. It's consistent when you look at all throughout all the price points. But of course, red wine is obviously the key here in China. So I know today we've tasted a lot of great Rieslings, which is almost not something that's being as greatly represented, although people are trying. It just doesn't stick in the market. But red wines and bold red wines really do work well. So a lot has to do with just the tariffs coming in, as well as just the category blowing up because of the consistency of the product. So it's very welcomed out here. We do see a very big demand for Australian red wines and big brands that have done very well to market themselves, because China is a very market-driven and brand-driven market.
Emily, so do you enjoy? I know you have. Sorry, you have this beautiful Penfield Grange with you, and you're in the industry, so it's a little bit different. But do you typically see people enjoying Australian wine? And now I'm going to ask you an even crazier question. What's your favorite Australian wine with Chinese food pairing? Like this, whether it's a spice or a dish specifically, like you're like, oh, Shiraz all day with this. I just want to get an idea of so people can understand the connection too with the food.
Australia is so well represented here in China. I would say from anything from natural wine bars are absolutely crazy about pit nat and natural wines. Australia completely represents that here in China, at least, and as well as some French, but mostly Australia. You'd be very shocked. Again, people can travel up, so a lot of winemakers come visit China, and they do a lot of great job. Wine Australia does a very good job to do a lot of education seminars, but also some great content as well. So congrats to you guys. So yeah, that would be the case, is that even insiders love it. And then of course, wholesale distributors do love it. So it's just a great, and also Australia is so large. I mean, today we went through Rieslings and Chardonnays that are lean, and then some styles that are Semillon, and you just have such a great diversity. So of course, Australia is well represented here and also enjoyed from all levels of entry level. If they're looking for something kind of like a Southeastern Australia, all the way to pet nat and natural wine lovers. There's a category for anybody. And we said sparkling, right? But what about Rutherglen? What about all the other cool wines that are being made? So there really is a market for it. In terms of favorite pairing, I mean, I love Riesling. I know today I didn't drink that, but I'm just like a Riesling fanatic. So, anything from like Bin 51. I love Pikes from Clare Valley, and Pouzyville, of course, you can't go wrong with them. Jim Barry does a great Riesling. So there's so many just awesome producers. But when I was in Yarra, one of the things that I loved the most was their sparkling wine. You can't go wrong with that either. And pairing, my gosh, anything. Dim sum, you can start off with that with sparkling, and then lunch you go for again, Cantonese or even Yunnan. Yunnan is near Tibet. So that's my favorite spot for food, because they use a lot of like natural ingredients and natural flowers in the cooking. So things like that, it's just so versatile, and people pinhole red wines here with everything. So we're very slow to adapt, but I'm a Riesling person. So I would say Riesling is quite versatile with spice and oil, and just all the different types of food that you see here.
And we must say, I don't think you started out by saying this, Emily, that you are Canadian. So, so it's a little bit different, because you're like, okay, I can do both. I can do what they do, with the locals, and I can do my own thing because I have a palate from, somewhere else too. So awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Chastity, pick us up and let us know how Chicago feels about Australian wine.
Yeah, I would say so. Because I like, I'm interested in tasting wines from so many different places. I tend to go to bigger stores like a Benny's or a Total Wine to get different types of things. Okay. The wine shops here that I have encountered so far are really European heavy. So your Italian wines, your French wines, which is cool. I love going to those spots and supporting those local businesses. But I would say the general perception, here in Chicago, for Australian wines, you have, Shiraz automatically comes to mind. I think Semillon is definitely starting to make its way. I know for me, I've had it before. I've had the French variety of it, but this one definitely surprised me, and it's definitely easy drinking and something I would introduce to friends for brunch. But I'm interested to now, when I go, I'm going to start, kind of sneaking around to these different wine shops and seeing, I don't think there's going to be like an Australian section, but I think what I'll try to do is, ask that wine shop owner, do you have any, wines that you would suggest that are from Australia? And if they don't, I'm like, well, maybe you should consider it. But it's definitely interesting when I do walk into these shops. I see a lot of like, Latin America, just very, specific areas like Latin America, Europe. But I hope Australia starts to make a come up here in the Chicago area.
So just even on the shelf, when you bought your Semillon, just give us a visual, because Leanne, obviously, when she goes to the store, that's all she sees.
That's all.
Right?
So
it's amazing.
To give her a perspective of when you were standing there and you chose that Semillon, what else did you see on that same shelf or just below it? Was it small? Yeah. Was it large? Was it all reds and just one bright that was like a holy grail?
Yeah, so I'll try to paint the picture. So Benny's is like, I kind of want to call it like a Walmart of wine. So you have like so many different, the backside of the store has like wines from all over the world. So there's actually an aisle for Australian wines. And there are some that are kind of dispersed throughout the store, but typically in that Australia aisle, you are going to get Shiraz, you're going to get like different shelves of each wine. So for me, I was looking more at a price point. I tend to, right now, as I'm studying for my WSET, I'm like, okay, I don't want to spend too much money on wine, but I want to be able to get a sense of, what it tastes like at a reasonable price. But definitely different varietals at, you have a higher price point on the shelf. It's like, you may have a wine that's around 35, and then you make your way down the shelf and you'll have something around like $8 to $10. So the different, varieties of wine were awesome. They're awesomely available. And there's just different, it's kind of like a, box of crayons, like there's different shades and different things that you can pick from. So I'm always overwhelmed when I go into Benny's because I want to buy everything, but I knew I had to go in very focused and pick out this bottle. But the selection is really cool. And I really tend to, encourage people to shop at local wine shops, but also if you're looking to kind of expand your palate, you walk into a Benny's or a Total Wine, you could have the entire world at your feet.
And I think that's Christie.
Wind up with that bottle, that specific bottle.
You say that again?
How did you pick out the terroirs?
I think it was definitely price point. I also tend to before I went to Benny's, I was looking for vintage and also price point. And so when I got there, I think when I looked it up, I was looking for, so I found a 2019. So I was surprised that this was a 2016 at around $15, $16. But yeah, I think it was just a matter of price point for me at that point. But there were different varieties that, went up to $35, $40 for sure.
I think it's funny because Emily just shared Penfield Grange. And Emily, can you just share about what is even the price point of the wine that you had? Oh, she's frozen.
Right. Well, I did the Ben 389, which is kind of we call baby Grange. So the Grange itself, I mean, honestly, I'm in China, so my prices are always different, but I do believe it's about $700 to $800, if I'm not mistaken. Leanne, back in Australia, how much is that? Because China's numbers are slightly skewed. But I think
it's in the realm of $700 or $800 Australian a bottle.
And Christie, what would you sell that for?
About in that range. I mean, it's hard to. It's a rare wine, so it's hard to lay hands on it as a retailer. But that pricing is about. So
in your store, Christie, if you had Emily's wine, how much you would price it in New York for?
I'm not 100% sure I would have, but in that range, and it definitely would not be on the shelf. On my shelf, I would more likely have Saint Henri, which is also a Penfolds wine, and that would probably be on my shelf for about $100 or so. That would be about as much as my shelves could bear.
I just wanted to take that moment because I think it's a context, right? I would say I have the ability to understand that Chastity's talking about wines being on the higher end, understanding that she's sharing that it's higher end for that store to be at 35 and 40, and then they have things that's lower than that. But the wine Emily just shared alone is about $500, $600. So when people think of Australia outside of China and outside of Australia, we have a limited perception of what Australia can do, unless you know about these very important producers like Penfield, and you can be able to understand the price points that they really can come in at. And we're talking about on the shelf, so forget even in the restaurant how much they will add on to that as well. So I just wanted to take that unique moment to realize if you're listening to this and you're listening to Chastity, trust me, a $35 Australian wine is still a budget wine compared to what Australia can do. So so that was just a moment. I was like, oh, let's share this real quick. Between four, we can knock that out the box. She had some awesome wine to share. So Philippe, go ahead and tell us again, I live in Portugal, so I think this is funny even talk about Australian wine on the shelf. But what's your thoughts on how, as an in-resident Portuguese person, what's your thoughts, even in like a big retailer down in Lisbon? What do you think? Can you get Australian wine at all? Is it, talk about that experience, I guess.
Yeah. Well, as you know, Chap, Portuguese don't tend to drink a lot of foreign wines. It's not only Australian, but well, we have done a lot of episodes, and we don't see it on the regular basis. The local people drinking that wine. So it's not easy to find Australian wine here. I bought mine on a big city, you know, Porto. On the regional stores, you really don't find it. And even though, you know, Porto and in Lisbon, I just saw 2 or 3 labels. So it's not really that common to find Australian wine here in Portugal. Well, it's really a pity because there's a lot of beautiful wines. We've been tasting them today, and whenever I travel, I always try to taste Australian and other wines from other wine regions. So it's a pity that Portuguese people don't drink that much. But I think episodes like this will help to bring more aficionados to the table. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I will do my part definitely.
That Australian pride has not left Philippe, so of course
Yeah.
he's going to make sure he's your largest representative, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But Christy, go ahead and share a moment about your store and how you've integrated Australian wine, obviously with all your knowledge, and like so in which, and I guess even in response to Chastity as well, and the big stores that she visited. Are you going up? Like you just mentioned, you wouldn't have the one that Emily had. That's way too expensive to have. And maybe it's just your area because it's not in New York City. But
yeah, I mean, I used to before I opened, I worked for Moet Hennessy from about 2000 to 2007. In the last couple of years that I was there, I was running the U.S. business for the Australia and New Zealand portfolios. We, lump them together, as everyone does. But that was Cloudy Bay from New Zealand, and then Greenpoint, which was Domaine Chandon in the U.S., and then Cape Mentelle, which was from Margaret River. So when I left to open my first shop, which was Frankly Wines, which was down in New York City, I came to that knowing the diversity of Australia, knowing what was available, and expecting to have a really solid Australia selection. And I kind of focused on Southern Hemisphere in general, but really deep in Australia. Around that time, the market changed a lot, and a lot of Australian wines became harder to find, and then they started to come back. So I've always had a really broad Australian selection that sort of would sit in the middle. I wasn't really doing the like the $6 Yellowtail, cheap and cheerful, sunshine in a bottle. I wasn't necessarily doing that because there was another shop right down the street that was doing the focus on that. And then I wasn't really doing the high end the super high end, because that's a little bit more of a collector's market. And there were shops that were already covering them. So I was just focusing sort of on that big middle, which at the time was anything from like $10 on up to say $100. And it was a small shop, and the shop that I have right now is still a small shop. So it's what can I hand sell? What can I be really, really excited about? Mm-hmm. And so kind of make a statement about, I love Australian wine. Here's the diversity, come into the shop, but it still has to be, that top line price point of, am I going to be able to sell it based just on who my business model is, knowing that there's this whole other set of shops that really do these more collectors driven high end markets.
Can I ask, how do you think that sealing and screw cap impacts the American consumer?
Well, for example, is Grange under screw cap? Emily?
Hi guys, I lost you for a second.
We're just talking a little bit about screw cap and consumer perception. I think increasingly in the US, it's less and less and less of an issue. At the very highest end, maybe a little bit, but I think as that customer that starts to become a collector is already starting from a younger age, and they're sort of growing into more of a collector mindset, I think it becomes increasingly less of an issue because they're already used to it. But I'd ask, is Grange in screw cap?
No, Grange is going to be cork, and there's two things about that. Let's say within China, even the wines from, let's say, 389, 407, 707, which are actually screw cap in Australia, are exported with cork to Asia. So because the perception of screw cap is not at all good out here in China, and people refuse to think that it's a real product if it's expensive and under screw cap. So we actually use everything in cork when it's exported out here to Asia. And then the other thing with Grange is a very unique situation, is that we actually do a recorking clinic. So any of our Penfold top-end wines over the age of 15 years, what we do is that you can bring it for free, and we recork it with our winemaker, Peter Gay.
All right, we got Emily frozen. At least she still look cute.
Yeah.
Very cute. So the answer is sometimes, a little bit. At the highest end, yeah. Probably.
Because it's something that in Australia was, I mean, it was your winery, your wine region that you showed was the pioneers of the second wave of screw cap, and you know, Yolanda tried it in the 70s, I think, and there's some old bottles you can buy that have a cork inside and then a screw cap over the top.
Yeah.
Hedge your bets. But you know, when I first started working in restaurants, I had people send wines back because you'd take it to the table and present it, and they'd say, "Oh, it's a screw cap, I don't want it." But that
even
changed
in Australia, people would do that.
So 2099, 2000. But it was it changed so quickly. It was so quickly adopted, and you know, we love to, not me, but I find it so boring, but going to Burgundy and saying, when are you going to put it under screw cap? But it's just so widely accepted, you don't even think twice. I mean, the Chardonnay is one of the top wines from this producer, and it's under screw cap, and you wouldn't even think
all of us had screw cap, correct? Did everybody have, except for Emily?
Yeah.
Did everybody have screw cap? Okay. Yeah. And I think that that's interesting, because here's two polar opposites. If people who are watching this don't know that Australia is the first official, I would say, country. It was actually developed there, right? The scientist who came up with the screw cap method for wine, if I'm not mistaken, is from Australia.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Oh, I don't know. I know. I mean, because I know Grosset, they were involved in the adaptation, so could be.
Yeah, okay. I remember studying that. And so I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were at least the first ones to like make it widestream for sure.
Absolutely.
And then we have Philippe and I both representing Portugal, who probably will never do that. It's funny she brought up Burgundy, but Portugal will never do that, because for those of you who don't know, Portuguese, they're like the #1 country in making natural cork. So it's like, it makes no sense to actually do the if you get more benefits from doing the cork and it's actually, you know, coming from your tree, which is right outside your vineyard, then it's kind of like, why do the whole screw cap mechanism, unless you're a large brand and have the facilities to do such, like Sogrop, etc. But when you coming from a small producer, they may have the tree right on a property. So they usually get, and you'll drive around Alentejo, which is the most southeastern region of Portugal. It is hot and it's amazing. You know, if you got a pool, is the California, you know, of the area when you talk about heat, like the central part of California, and you see all these bald trees. I'm like, what's going on with these trees? People have been shaving the trees down to get the cork. And so here we have Leanne in Australia talking about screw caps, and then here we are talking about Portugal. Like, not that you won't see it, it just will be rare because they have the access to so much cork in Portugal. So I thought that was interesting. So thanks for bringing the question up. And I did wanted to ask another question, because I always give out money on these programs. Yes, child, the fairy godmother. So I am giving you all money. You're welcome in advance. And you are going to invest in Australia winemaking. And so in this case, what region and what grape? So just tell me whether it's a grape you you actually taste it today, one of us tastes it together, or maybe it's another grape that you feel like needs a little love, but you feel like would do really well in a region we didn't discuss. I'm very interested in seeing where you would take my blank check that I'm giving to all of you graciously to invest in this new wine project. Okay, so whoever want to start first, this is up to you to spend all the cash I have.
I have an answer.
All right, I'm ready.
I would take your check and I would invest it in a handful of growers and wineries that are working on projects up in the Riverlands, which is typically considered an area of high volume, really like solid quality. And it's not even, it's going to be it's in South Australia, further inland from where all those regions are, and
How far
over towards the east.
Over towards the east.
So towards where New South Wales, Victoria meet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
There's a big river system through there.
It's hot. It's inland. It's to grow a lot of different kinds of grapes there, you might have to irrigate, but as drought has become increasingly prominent, as water becomes more expensive, there are a handful of producers that are working with these sort of, and a lot of them are Italian grapes, Vermentino. I know Grenache is not Italian, Vermentino, Montepulciano, grapes that work really well in this climate. And I would also put some of that money into some producers in the McLaren Vale who are doing that as well already. And it's a way to kind of work with the climate that you're given to grow grapes that are very well suited. They require less inputs in the vineyard, less inputs in the winery, and they're making some really fun, delicious, exciting wines that hopefully they're driving a lot of excitement in the US market. It's not a big percentage of what we're seeing production wise in any sense of the word, but it's some cool, fun wines that seem to be in keeping with sustainability and lighter, fresher wine trends. And that's what I would do with your money, Cha, if you would.
All right, sound like it's well spent. Leanne, any place while I still have the map up? I know you know it.
You kind of stole mine. Mine is also those. I've done a couple of years of judging at the Alternative Varieties Wine Show, which are all the varieties that aren't, Shiraz and Cabernet and things like that. So, and they are the potential for things like Nero d'Avola, Greco, Vermentino in Australia is vast. And because we have such a multicultural society, there's a lot of interest in experimenting and adapting those to different cuisines, and it's very exciting. Some of the regions that I think should be more celebrated are things like the Alpine valleys, which I just find one of the most exciting wine regions. Gippsland is just this vast area with
help me out, Leanne. Where am I
going? Gippsland. Gippsland is kind of east of, so see where you see Mornington Peninsula and Yarra Valley?
Yep.
And you go east from there.
Okay.
East. And it's an enormous region, absolutely enormous. Mostly known for Pinot Noir, but there's so much potential there because it's quite cool. Some areas are dry and some get lots of rainfall. It's a traditional cattle farming area. And then the other place I'd look at is maybe, not knowing much about it, but south of McLaren Vale in the Fleurieu Peninsula. It's quite cool, but water might be a problem there. Water is a concern everywhere. So we're looking at low input varieties and varieties that are more adapted to the Australian climate than traditional French varieties.
Emily, are you there?
Yeah, hopefully hopefully it works now. Sorry about that.
No worries. I just want to know how you spend my money.
Perfect time for this to work, right? I obviously started off as well to think about, kind of the regions you guys have just highlighted, but I mean, two areas that kind of strike me: Tasmania, just because there's so much potential to, in a cooler climate kind of aspect. So if there is global warming, then that's a little bit of a safe spot. But then a lot of people are now investing in Tasmania to source cooler fruit when they are doing Chard and Pinot and sparkling, but Margaret River as well, because the views are just stunning. Anybody that's ever been to Margaret River will attest to that. So especially when it comes out to, I'm a big fan of Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon blends as well. And I find those to be just absolutely stunning when they come from Margaret River. So I would say, can I split your money in half and go to 2 spots at once and 2
All right.
styles?
All right. Who else? Philippe, tell me where you're spending my money.
Yeah, that's the easy one. I would do some sparkling wine. Now that I know in Adelaide Hills, definitely.
Oh, okay. So you want to go to Adelaide Hills and you're going to make your sparkling. All right. Now remember, you're going to have to spend a lot of money. We just heard about all the heat that's there. So, I'm not giving you more money than anybody else. Everybody's got an equal check, okay?
He'll go to the hills.
Okay, go to the top. Yes. Chastity?
I'd probably split your money being like thinking about like sustainability and how the fires have impacted even the region where my wine comes from. I'd probably share some of that money with some of those vineyards out there to help with the rebuilding process, because it is such a popular region from where Semillon and other wines come from. And even honestly, Chardonnay, I'm super surprised to hear about Leanne's description of her wine. I know here in the States, we're still coming out of that perception of Chardonnay being super oaky and buttery. And, I had a discussion with my mom the other day. She's like, oh, I don't like Chardonnay. I was like, you haven't had the right one. That's why you're saying you don't like
Yes.
So I would definitely throw some of my money to the Adelaide Hills to make sure that they, have that influence here in the States, because a lot of our Chardonnays are, French influence, they're California influence. And I think it's really cool for people to get a sense of, a different vibe from Chardonnay and not just the buttery, oaky, sing-song dance that we've been hearing in the States for so long.
Awesome. All right. And then just where I'm spending my own money, it was interesting to hear more about Yarra. So I appreciated that and understand. I'm always going for the underdogs and people doing new, innovative things. So, so I was happy to hear Christie bring that up as well. But I originally just thought Margaret River, because that's the reason why I even have Semillon to taste with you guys, is because my all-time favorite blend is always white Bordeaux. And I just think because it just gets no love. I didn't mention earlier, but Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc is the popular blend of Bordeaux, and it also is the blend for Sauternes. And so I'll be interested in seeing how to come up with a botrytis Sauternes style from this area, as well as just doing some really cool things with that blend in Margaret River. So great.
Can I also recommend, since you mentioned Sauternes and other like sweet, lush dessert wines, there are some gorgeous old fortified wines. You could go like buy a barrel of your birth year, or maybe a couple bottles. That would be in Seppelsfield. That would be worth at least just a little bit of your investment money.
Worth it. Totally
Keep
worth
it for yourself. Keep it for yourself.
Yes, I love that idea. So, but thank you guys for being on this awesome jam-packed. I feel like it was long, but I feel like it was very insightful. and I hope that people take that away from this episode as well. I mentioned to them offline that this is the first episode we're doing where we represent 4 different continents at the same time, and so it's very awesome to come to the 10th week for United We Taste. And that was the idea: how do we actually connect the global community during this time, during the pandemic, where we're all affected in some way or another? So whether it's a city like New York, or if it's a place that feels safer, or if it's even in China, where there's a lot of mentality of hate going on towards certain people from certain places. I just thought that we should just come together and have this camaraderie and solidarity for each other. And so I appreciate you all representing your cities, your countries, your continents in this very, I think, momentous one for us. I think it's crazy to think that it's just past 2 months that we've been doing this every week consecutively at this point. So thank you again for being here with us. And if people on the East Coast, or at least in New York, is just joining, please watch the replay and see our previous episodes. So thanks again, and cheers, you guys. I'm going to end with the toast to you all for joining us. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks.
The Simeon is doing a lot of things now. It has a lot of, it's like a star fruit. Oh my God, this has this. Oh, good. He didn't bark the whole time until now.
You were done.
Impeccable.